Today we're going to meet the American author Richard Wright. Richard Wright was born on a plantation near Natchez, Mississippi on September 4th, 1908. He was the son of a sharecropper who deserted his family when Wright was only 5. And soon after, his mother became ill, so the family moved to Jackson, Mississippi with his grandmother. Now, grandmother tried to stop Richard Wright from writing. His grandmother attempted to crush his imagination. So Wright and his brother lived in an orphanage for a short time because of family problems. They were so impoverished they just couldn't take care of the entire family. Now, in his own writing for his biography, he would recall his childhood as a time of hunger, not only for food, but also for affection, for understanding, and for his education. Although a very good student, Wright never graduated from high school. Now, Richard Wright's jobs in the South were marked by harassment by whites and by his own disdain for what segregation and racism had done to distort the humanity of his fellow blacks, at least as he saw it. The harsh conditions of the South pushed Wright to his first exposure with urban naturalism. Wright said he could not read enough of the urban naturalist writers. Now, the term naturalism describes a type of literature that attempts to apply scientific principles of objectivity and detachment to the study of human beings. Unlike realism, which focuses on the literary technique, naturalism implies a philosophical position. For naturalistic writers, since human beings are, in Émile Zola's phrase, human beasts, characters can be studied through their relationships to their surroundings. So what are the key themes of urban naturalism? Well, the sense of survival. You have to be able to survive in your environment. The sense of determinism, because there's a lot of things going against you in that natural environment, you have to be determined to rise up. You might also find a sense of violence and a sense of the taboo. You're also going to notice the brute within each individual, like Émile Zola's idea of the human beasts. Now, this brute within composed of strong and often warring emotions. There's passions such as lust, greed, or the desire for dominance and pleasure. There also could be the fight for survival in an amoral and indifferent universe. Now, the conflict in naturalistic novels is often man against nature, or it could be man against itself. Now, characters struggle to retain this veneer of civilization despite external pressures that threaten to release the brute from within. For example, perhaps Bigger Thomas. Now, the forces of heredity and environment as they affect and afflict individual lives is a key to naturalism in the urban center. Continuing on with Richard Wright, in 1927, he fled the South for Chicago. Now, in Chicago, Wright seemed headed for a career in the post office, but at the same time, he was determined to become a writer. Wright found a circle of friends with similar views, and in 1933, he joined the John Reed Club. Now, this was a nationwide organization founded by the Communist Party to attract writers and artists. And between 1933 and 1940, the first major stage of Wright's literary career, communism was clearly the major intellectual and political force for his life. Now, in 1938, 4 of Richard Wright's stories were collected as Uncle Tom's Children. He then received a Guggenheim Fellowship, which allowed him to complete his first novel, Native Son, in 1940. In 1939, he married Dima Rose Meadman, a white dancer, but the two separated shortly thereafter. So in 1941, he married Ellen Poplar, a white member of the Communist Party, and they had 2 daughters, Julia in 1942 and Rachel in 1949. Now, after moving to Paris in 1946, Wright became friends with Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus while going through an existentialist phase best depicted by his second novel, The Outsiders, in 1953. Now, in his last years, he was plagued by illness, probably aerobic dysentery, and a lot of financial hardship. Now, throughout this period, he wrote approximately 4,000 English haikus, some of which were recently published for the first time, and yet another novel, The Long Dream, in 1958. Now, after his death on November 28, 1960, another of his collections of short stories, 8 Men, was published. But Richard Wright's most famous work, arguably, is still his autobiographical work, Black Boy, from 1945. But let's take a look at Native Son. The major goal of Wright's writing is the exposure of the starkest realities of American life where race was concerned. So therefore, the theme is going to be the effects of racism on the individual. But there's also going to be other themes that affect this sense of racism. The sense of communism, where the lack of race is being affected. Naturalism, your urban naturalism, where you've got the environment that is affecting you. The sense of justice in combination with the racism on the individual. And the comforts that religion can have. Now, Native Son was meant to be America's guide in confronting the nature of facing the profound consequences of more than 2 centuries of the enslavement and segregation of blacks in North America. Slavery and neo-slavery had led not simply to the development of a psychology of timidity, passivity, and even cowardice among African American masses. And according to Wright, he suggests that it also gives rise to characters like Bigger Thomas. So when you take a look at his characters, they are estranged from both black and white culture through their hatred of both cultures, which is going to give rise to acts of violence. Now, these acts of violence were most often aimed at other African Americans, but Wright warned that one day it would be aimed at whites. Now, other than his urban naturalism, 2 other intellectual forces came together to shape Native Son. Remember, communism was his very strong philosophy at the time, and he was starting to dabble in existentialism before he went off to France. Now again, communism is the political and economic doctrine that aims to replace private property and a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of at least the major means of production and the natural resources of a society. Existentialist conceptions of freedom and value arise from their view of the individual. Since we're all ultimately alone, isolated islands of subjectivity in an objective world, we have the absolute freedom over our internal nature, and the source of our value can only be internal. Its main principle would mean existence precedes the essence. So when we look at the French existentialists like Sartre and Camus that Richard Wright was hanging out with, you need to consider the following ideas. Existentialists believe in our free will, that the individual comes first. Existentialists do not recognize any human or immortal authority. There's no faith because you should have no hope. You are it. They also denied God's existence in a cruel world, which is full of suffering. And after going through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II, this had a hold on quite a few people. Existentialists believe that they're responsible for all of the consequences of their own actions. The existentialists don't believe in an afterlife. And we have a couple of the existentialists who are going to affect Richard Wright's. Sartre stated that we are condemned to be free, and Camus stated that life is absurd. Thank you so much for stopping by for a brief biography on Richard Wright. If you'd like to learn more about Native Son, maybe perhaps you'd like to hear about Black Boy by Richard Wright, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what other videos I can make for you. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed.